don't judge a book by its cover if it's only the outer skin. There aren't only rocks out there. NASA officials made the mistake of not bringing scientists to the conversation that analyze the data. I listed 13 anomalies about 3A Atlas, and they didn't talk about anomalies. They just wanted to deliver a narrative. This is not the way science is done. Raising questions and showing more data will actually resolve these questions. If we realize alien technology is entering the solar system, I think it will bring us to a sense of planetary defense. As long as we survive the first encounter, it will change everything.
How do the echoes of the Holocaust you describe in your books and Israel's war for survival during your childhood influence your sense of urgency about humanity's future and the importance of reaching beyond the Earth?
Well, if you look at what happens on Earth right now, and it's not just limited to the Middle East, but most of our attention is to conflicts over territories, and these are pieces of land on the surface of a rock, which is just a little bit of debris left over from the formation of the sun. Okay, so the Earth is tiny. It's 3 parts in a million of the mass of the sun. A tiny bit that was left behind and coagulated into a planet, and we assign a huge importance. When I say we, I mean, for example, Putin. To a small piece of land, and he puts a lot of people on basically on a death row. Just think about it. It's a small sliver of land. Now, my point is simple. Most of the real estate is actually out there in space, because, as I said, there are maybe 10 billion Earth-like planets out there just in the Milky Way galaxy, and altogether 1 trillion galaxies like it in the observable volume of the universe, and many more beyond the observable volume of the universe. We know that the conditions that we find in the observable volume continue at least 4,000 times farther. So there is just a huge number of similar systems with much more real estate than we have. And for some reason, we are just obsessed with a piece of land on this rock. And, it might not be for very long, because humanity might not survive for many centuries into the future, given what we do, how much damage we can cause to this planet, to ourselves. And so it's really very short-sighted, the way we think about things. And how can this change? I'm not that naive to think that politicians one day will wake up and say, well, you know what? We are all in the same boat. Let's cooperate. It will not happen. So the one trigger that can bring us to a better state is if we find alien technology, somewhere near us, which would alert us to 2 things. First, we have a sibling in our family of intelligent civilizations within the Milky Way galaxy. There is another one, at least. And moreover, this sibling arrived to our backyard before we arrived to their backyard. So they are more accomplished than we are. Maybe they had a time advantage. They started billions of years ago, before the sun was born. Perhaps that's the reason they're here. But at any event, there is a role model from whom we can learn something. We can be inspired. And right now we're investing $2.4 trillion in military budgets. About $1 trillion is assigned to the defense budget of the US in 2026. So that's a lot of money. And if we realize that alien technology is entering the solar system, I think it will bring us to a sense of planetary defense, a defense of the planet from outside, and then perhaps we will allocate a fraction of these $2.4 trillion to space exploration. So my hope is, let's say $1 trillion a year will go into construction of a network, an array of sensors and interceptors that, whenever there is an incoming object from outside the solar system, we would take a close-up photograph of it and decide what to do about it if it's not just a rock. A technological object is much more dangerous than a rock, because a rock has a prescribed path that we can deflect in principle, but a technological object could maneuver, it could have an intent, and that's far more dangerous. So if we invest $1 trillion a year on this infrastructure in space, first of all, it changes the geopolitics of the planet. because we are now working together. And moreover, just think about what we might discover with $1 trillion a year in space exploration. I had a podcast. I have many, but one of them was a couple of weeks ago with Newt Gingrich. The former Speaker of the House. I was really
Sure.
surprised because he started it. I'm not sure if it was in the recording, but he said, Avi, it's a great honor to speak with you. I really wanted to thank you for bringing space to the attention of the public in a way that was far more effective just over the past few months, far more effective than was done ever before. And I found that to be really a surprise for me that because I've never spoken with him. So the way it will enter into politics is, of course, after the first encounter with alien technology. I'm not expecting it to happen before, but I do think that as long as we survive the first encounter, then it will change everything. It will change politics. It will change the financial markets because people will not have the same sense of security, safety they have right now. And it will change, obviously, philosophy, religion, the way we think about ourselves in the context of the universe.
Yeah. And, you frequently quote Sherlock Holmes' line, there's nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact. Why is that?
Comet experts behave just like AI systems. They are basing their assertions on the training data set that they had over the decades, which is icy rocks in space. And my point is really simple. I'm saying, you need to expand your training data set because we know that we launched technological equipment to space. So there aren't only rocks out there. And it's quite likely that there were others that did the same in the Milky Way galaxy because there are so many Earth-Sun analogs out there. So we should just allow for the possibility that some of the objects entering the solar system will not be just rocks. They might target the inner solar system. And we should examine if, anomalies that suggest that maybe an object is not behaving just as we expected for a rock, rather than dismissing that possibility. What these comet experts are missing when they talk about an obvious interpretation is that, when they say obvious, they probably mean 98%, 95%, whatever. This is okay in the context of, a star exploding at the edge of the universe. You can say the 95% confidence, I think it's this mechanism triggering it. Because if you're wrong, it doesn't affect anything, here on Earth. Who cares?
And does it frustrate you? I mean, you have the NASA, I think he was the associate director that came out and said, this object is a comet, looks like a comet, behaves like a comet. And all the evidence suggests it's a comet. I mean, it's like you probably want to kill him.
These were NASA officials at a press conference, and they made the mistake of, you know,
Right.
not bringing scientists to the conversation that would, that analyze the data and would talk about. They didn't talk about anomalies. They just wanted to deliver a narrative. And this is not the way science is done. As I said before, it's not the arrogance of expertise, not telling the public what this, but raising questions and showing that more data will actually resolve these questions. And there are definitely, I listed 13 anomalies that about 3A Atlas, and they didn't mention any of them except one that they even dismissed, which was that this object shed mostly nickel with very little iron, not even detectable, and that we don't find in any other astronomical object. Usually, iron and nickel come together, except for the technological production of nickel alloys, where the iron is separated out. And the astronomers that wrote these papers reporting about nickel without iron, they said that maybe the same process that we use in our industries, which is the carbonyl pathway, is also happening in nature. That was their explanation. And I say, well, maybe it's a technological signature. Why not consider that? Because that's the only place where we find nickel without iron. So the fact that NASA officials showed up and they presented fuzzy images, really, they tried to tamper down any excitement about this object. This is not the way that science should be done. It should be like the work of a detective. You talk specifically about things that are unusual and how you either explain them, or if you can't explain them, how you plan to explain them. This is the way science is done, because what do you expect from a spacecraft? If you what is the definition of a comet? That it sheds some gas or dust from its surface as a result of being illuminated by the sun, and we see some cometary tail, because this dust and gas are pushed away from the sun, and you see a tail behind the object. That's how a comet is defined. And but imagine a spacecraft going
Right.
through some dense environment in interstellar space and accumulating on its surface some ice because it's freezing out there, and accumulating on its surface some dust, collecting it along the path. Then when it comes close to the sun, it will shed those materials. So you would say it's a comet, but don't judge a book by its cover if it's only the outer skin. That you can't say that until you actually know what the content of this object is. I mean, we know about the Trojan horse tail, when it was clear
Yeah.
that this is not very suspicious, but it ended up changing the future of the city of Troy. So we just need to be careful. It's a very superficial assessment as to something being a comet, walks like a comet. What does she mean by walks like a comet? She means it responds to gravity. Okay, so any object responds to gravity. There was actually some evidence for non-gravitational acceleration of 3 Atlas, which was not even mentioned or discussed in this press conference. So the public really was frustrated by this press conference. It didn't serve any good purpose. The actually good data came a couple of weeks later from the Hubble telescope, a very good image of 3I Atlas, which indicated that there is a jet coming from it in the direction of the sun. And this is an anti-tail. In other words, we don't see evidence for a tail in the Hubble image. Instead, we see an extension towards the sun, not away
Right.
from the sun. And that was true also in July. On July 21st, Hubble observed it first. When it was approaching the sun, we saw an extension, a jet pointed towards the sun, nothing going backwards, away from the sun. Then, most recently, at the end of November 30th, there was another image after the object passed closest to the sun on October 29th. And now, still, there is an extension of the glow around the object towards the sun. So relative to the direction of motion, it's now opposite, and it's an anti-tail in both cases when it was approaching and receding. So clearly there is something we don't understand. I wrote 3 papers trying to explain it. The NASA officials did not even refer to that.
Yeah. In a week, December 19, it's going to be when it's
Right.
closest to the Earth. What do you think might happen, or will we get better images that will help prove what you've been saying?
More data, the better. I mean, I would still give most odds to the likelihood that it's actually a natural object, but it has anomalies that make it unique and unusual. But December 19th is really a good date to observe it because it will be a new moon, so there won't be much moonlight contaminating the sky. And my hope is that hundreds of observatories around the Earth will look at it, also the Webb telescope and potentially the Hubble telescope. So we will get a lot of data. It will take a few weeks for the data to come out, so we will not know immediately. But my wish is that we will get some spectroscopic data that would give us the speed of the gas in the jets. We see multiple jets coming from the object, the nucleus of the object, in different directions. And I would like to know if the speed of the gas is a few hundred meters per second or lower than that, which would be consistent with the sublimation of pockets of ice on the surface of a rock by sunlight illuminating or warming these pockets of ice, compared to technological thrusters, which usually eject gas at a much larger speed of a few kilometers per second for chemical propellants, or a few tens of kilometers per second for ion thrusters. And so if we see a high speed, that would be indicative of technology. If we see a low speed of less than a few hundred meters per second, then maybe it's natural. That would be my first priority in terms of what I want to know. And the second is the composition of those jets and how much mass is flowing through them. If it turns out that a significant fraction of the object is coming out in these jets, and we see that they move at slow speeds and they are made primarily of carbon dioxide ice vapor, or water ice vapor, or carbon monoxide ice vapor, then I would say it's probably a natural object. In July, I defined a scale that is now called the Loeb classification scale, where 0 means a natural object, 10 means a technological object, potentially a threat to humanity. And I will be able to rank this object. I started with a rank of 4 when it was just discovered, and now I'm waiting for this new
Right.
data to refine my assessment.